There are things on the road that don't show up on any map. Tonight, we have 3 accounts from men who live their lives on the blacktop. These are 3 true trucker horror stories based on chilling real-life events. First, a long-haul driver is swallowed by an unnatural fog in the Nevada desert, where he discovers a line of ghost trucks and a presence that wants inside his cab. Then, a man drives into a mountain tunnel and emerges hours later into a world that feels subtly wrong, with a strange, cold object left behind on his passenger seat. And finally, a veteran trucker pulls into a busy rest stop for the night, only to wake up completely alone in its crumbling ruins, as if decades have passed in an instant. The next time you're driving at night and the silence gets too loud, remember that the most dangerous things on the road are the ones you can't see in your mirrors. Subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss what's coming for you. He had a daughter to put through college. That's the thought that kept Jake's eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel. 7 years of long hauls had taught him how to manage the fatigue, how to talk himself through the endless miles of dark, empty highway. His rig, a Peterbilt 379 he called the Iron Horse, was more than a truck. It was his second home, and it had never let him down. Tonight, though, the Nevada desert felt different. The cold was sharper, the silence deeper. Just past the last lights of Austin, Nevada, the trouble started. It wasn't the engine or the tires. It was the brand new GPS unit on his dash. The screen, usually a crisp, bright blue, flickered and dissolved into gray static. Then a calm, pleasant voice, the same one that always guided him, spoke a single, impossible command. "Make a U-turn here." Jake looked out at the dead straight ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the blackness. There was nothing out there. He rubbed his tired eyes, blaming the late hour and the half-empty bag of chips on the passenger seat. New technology was always buggy. Then the world outside his cab simply vanished. It wasn't a normal fog, the kind that creeps up from a low spot in the road. This was a sudden, thick, white wall that slammed into his truck, swallowing his headlights whole. The air in the cab suddenly felt different, heavy and cold, carrying a strange metallic taste like he was licking a battery. A deep chill cut through the steel of the truck and settled into his bones. He reached for his CB, hoping for the comfort of another trucker's voice, but all he got was a high-pitched ringing noise. He figured the radio was just on the fritz, another piece of gear failing in the sudden, biting cold. But then, under the ringing, he could hear something else. A faint, dry whispering, like dead leaves scraping against the glass. He remembered a detour, State Route 375, the extraterrestrial highway. He'd heard the stories, the jokes. At this point, a shortcut and a weird story to tell the guys later sounded like a good deal. He turned the Iron Horse onto the lonely stretch of road, and the real cold, the one that had nothing to do with the temperature, began to set in. That's when he saw the first truck. It was a chrome tanker, polished to a mirror shine, sitting perfectly on the shoulder of the road. Its engine was running, a soft, steady purr in the thick silence. Jake slowed his rig to a crawl, peering into the cab as he passed. It was empty. No driver, no coat on the seat, no sign of life at all. His first thought was practical, a roadblock, maybe an accident up ahead. Then he saw the second truck, a rusted flatbed. Its back door was slightly ajar. Spilled onto the cold asphalt behind it was a child's playset. There were dolls with cracked plastic faces and little toy cars. As he rolled past, he heard it. A little girl's laughter. It wasn't a scary sound. It was the sound of a happy child, a playful giggle that had absolutely no business being out here in the dead of night. His own engine gave a sudden, strangled groan, and a new sound started. A rhythmic, metallic tapping, a low thump, thump, thump that he could feel vibrating up through the floorboards and into the driver's seat itself. It seemed to be coming from just outside the cab, right behind his head. He passed the third truck, a shining red Kenworth. The cab was spotless, except for one thing. The driver's seat was gone, not broken or torn out. It was just missing, leaving clean bolt holes in the floor, as if it had been plucked straight out of the truck. The unease in his stomach turned into a sick, churning panic. The whispers on the CB were louder now, clearer. They were inside the cab with him, a single scraping word over and over. "Help! Help! Help!" His headlights cut through the fog and caught a shape on the side of the road. A man, just a dark figure in a hoodie, with his thumb out. Jake's eyes locked on him, and he blinked from the strain. In that instant, the man was gone. Jake swore he saw a flash of red light in his rearview mirror, but when he looked back, there was only the suffocating white fog. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was losing his mind. He let out a laugh, a sharp, panicked sound that didn't sound like him at all. He was so busy scanning the mirrors for the man, for the red light, that he almost missed the last truck. It was a plain black box truck. As his headlights swept across it, he saw something on the driver's side window. A foggy handprint. The fingers were impossibly long and thin, and they were pointed directly at his own window. As he stared, the high-pitched ringing in his ears sharpened into a painful shriek. The whispers on the radio changed. They weren't asking for help anymore. In a single, clear, scraping voice, they said, "He's here." Jake's eyes shot to his own driver's side window. A matching handprint was slowly forming on the glass, the fog of it appearing from nowhere. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. It wasn't possible. The disbelief lasted only a second before it curdled into a cold, pure fear that seized his heart. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. The iron horse groaned, the engine straining, and then it gave a final metallic death rattle and went silent. The high-pitched ringing in his head stopped. The whispers on the radio stopped. The only sounds left were the engine ticking as it cooled and that soft metallic tapping, now right outside his door. He was stranded. When the engine died, the silence that fell wasn't empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed in on him, suffocating and watchful. He heard a soft scrape on the asphalt, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming right toward his door. He fumbled for his phone, his heart pounding. No signal. His eyes darted to the side mirror, desperately searching the thick white fog, but he saw nothing. There was nothing there. But the footsteps had stopped, and he knew with a certainty that chilled his soul that something was now standing right beside his truck, just out of sight. He squeezed his eyes shut, trapped in the cab, as the metallic tapping started again right behind his seat. The next thing he knew, a bright light was shining in his face. A state trooper was at his window, his face etched with concern. Jake's engine was silent. The other trucks were gone. The officer was kind, patient. He explained that they'd found him pulled over, his engine completely shot. The fog out here, he said, could play tricks on a tired mind. It was a simple breakdown on a bad road, and a part of Jake, a desperate, terrified part, clung to that explanation. He wanted to believe it more than anything. He let them tow his rig. He took a bus home. Jake drives a day cab for a local grocery store now. He's home every night. He tells the story of that night to any new driver who will listen. He doesn't hear the tapping anymore. The whispers and the ringing are gone. But every time a thick fog rolls in, he thinks about the impossible handprint that formed on his window. The memory is the reason he is home every night. It's the reason he never, ever drives in the dark. Dawson knew this piece of I-64, knew it in the rain, in the snow, in the dead heat of July. He knew its rhythms. For a man who lived in a driver's seat, the road wasn't just a job. It was the whole world. His rig, an old Kenworth he'd had for years, was more a home than his actual apartment. He knew the groan of the engine pulling a grade and the sigh of the air brakes at a stop. Routine was everything. Check the tires, check the log, drink bitter coffee from a steel thermos, and watch the world go by through a bug-spattered windshield. Tonight was no different. Just another long haul to the port of Virginia. Just him, the road, and the quiet dark of the West Virginia black. That tunnel cut straight through the Alleghenies. Wasn't long, usually just a minute or two of darkness before you were out the other side. He saw the entrance coming, a black mouth in the side of the mountain. As he approached, he felt the air get cool and damp. The lights inside were that dim, yellow kind that made everything look sick. The walls closed in, and the sound of his tires changed. It went from a road noise to a hollow rush, a sound that always seemed to get inside your head. The familiar smell of wet rock and old exhaust filled the cab. Something went wrong the second his rig went in. Engine sound just died. Not a stall. He knew what a stall felt like. This was different. It just got quiet. Like someone in a control room somewhere had turned a knob all the way down. Cold hit him fast. A real cold, not from the weather. It felt like it was pulling the heat right out of him. A damp chill that went straight through his jacket. Goosebumps shot up his arms and crawled up the back of his neck. He glanced at the temperature gauge, normal. Everything on the dash was normal, but it was freezing in the cab. Then the lights started going out, one by one, winking off in his rearview mirror. The darkness behind him was absolute, eating the reflections of his own taillights. It left him with nothing but his own high beams, and they didn't seem to do much good. The light just seemed to stop a few feet from the grill, swallowed up by a blackness that felt heavy, solid, felt trapped. He knew he was moving forward. He could feel the slight vibration through the floorboards, but it was all wrong. No noise, no feeling of speed. It was like being in a dream, the truck just a dead weight being pulled through nothing. The cold got worse, a deep cold, down in the bone, and a weird smell came with it. Faint at first, then stronger, like old copper, like a bad penny held under your nose. He strained to see the end of the tunnel, but all he could make out was that little dot of light that never, ever got any bigger. His skin started to prickle. That old feeling you get when you're being watched. He scanned his mirrors, but there was only black. Still, he couldn't shake it. A feeling of presence. Something in the dark with him, keeping pace. Just when he thought he couldn't take the suffocating quiet anymore, the truck jumped forward. The engine came back with a deafening roar that almost blew his ears out, making him flinch hard against the seat. The rich, thick smell of diesel filled the cab again, a smell that had never been more welcome. The end of the tunnel was right there. He shot out into morning light, a pale yellow sunrise that had no business being there. He'd just passed the sign for White Sulphur Springs, but another sign for the very same exit stood right in front of him. Different words. Said, "The Greenbrier exit." Dawson pulled the rig over onto the shoulder, his hands shaking so bad he could barely grip the wheel. He looked at the dash clock, 7 a.m. His paper logbook was on the passenger seat. Last entry he made was 2:58 a.m. He went to turn the page, but it was stuck. 2 pages, glued together with something thick and tacky. He had to work a fingernail under the edge and peel them apart. The page after his 2:58 entry was perfectly blank. The next one started fresh at 7 a.m. The ink looked different. 4 hours, just gone. Wiped clean out of the book like they never existed. He just sat there, the engine idling, trying to make the world make sense again. A long black car shot past him on the highway. The body was sleek, the hood impossibly long. Looked like nothing he'd ever seen on a road before. It made no sound at all as it passed, just a black blur that was there and then gone. The air in his cab now had a sharp, biting smell, like after a lightning strike mixed with something scorched. He rolled both windows down, letting the morning air blast through, but the smell wouldn't leave. It was baked into the truck now, a passenger he couldn't get rid of. That's when he saw it, sitting on the passenger seat, right where the logbook had been. A small black stone, perfectly smooth, like a river rock, but darker than any stone he'd ever seen. He knew, with a certainty that made his stomach clench, that it wasn't there before. He picked it up. The cold from it was a shock, a dead, absolute cold that sucked the warmth right out of his fingers. He looked for a reason. Maybe it fell out of his bag, but it didn't look like anything he owned. As he stared at it, he thought he saw a pattern on its surface, faint and oily, swirl for just a second. He closed his fist around it, and the cold felt like a final warning. Dawson got back on the road, but nothing looked right anymore. The colors of the trees seemed off. The other cars on the road looked strange, their shapes subtly wrong. He made it to the port, dropped the load, got the papers signed. He tried to act normal, nodding at the dock workers, making small talk. But he felt like he was watching himself from a great distance. The smell was still in his cab. He put the stone in a plastic Ziploc bag and shoved it deep in the toolbox on the passenger floor. Out of sight, but not out of mind. He could still feel its cold from there. He tried telling the story once, just once, put it out on the CB radio, dressed it up as a spooky tale to kill the miles. All he got back was static, a laugh, and a crackle asking if he was drunk. So that was that. The world thought he was batshit crazy. The fear was his alone to carry, and sometimes he'd still feel it coming, that deep, pulling quiet. The sound of the world's volume knob getting turned down, and the cold dread of knowing that one day it might not turn back up. There are stories you hear out on the road, tales passed between drivers over crackling CB radios or in the greasy air of a late-night diner. Most of them are just that, stories. But this one's different. This happened to a guy, an old-timer named Red. He was a trucker's trucker, the kind of guy who'd been driving since the late 80s. He drove a Freightliner Classic XL, a real machine, all steel and diesel with no computers to tell him what to do. His record of the road wasn't on some tablet. It was in a paper logbook with lines drawn in pen, just the way it was supposed to be. Red was pushing it hard, trying to make up time on Interstate 80, deep in that long, empty stretch of southern Wyoming. If you've ever driven that road, you know what it's like. It's just you, the wind, and a whole lot of nothing in every direction. The kind of place that feels like it could swallow you whole and nobody would ever know. It was getting late, well past midnight, and his fuel gauge was starting to look dangerously low. So when he saw the blue sign for a state-run rest stop, it felt like a prayer being answered. It wasn't a big, fancy travel center, just a simple pull-off with a brick building and some parking spots. As he steered the big rig down the off-ramp, the place looked alive. The parking lot was nearly full of other trucks, their engines quietly running, their marker lights glowing softly in the dark. He could hear the normal sounds of a busy stop, the things a trucker's ears are tuned to, the muffled sound of a television from a nearby cab, the sharp hiss of an air brake being released, the clank of a fifth wheel as a driver hooked up to a trailer. It was all perfectly normal. He found an open spot at the end of a row, backed the trailer in, and started his shutdown sequence. He pulled the big yellow knob on the dash, then the red one, and the truck let out a loud rush of air as the brakes locked on. He turned the key, and the powerful growl of the diesel engine died. The silence that filled the cab was sudden and heavy. The air, which a moment before had smelled of coffee and exhaust, now carried the sharp, clean scent of the cold Wyoming night. He clicked on his little reading light, pulled out his logbook, and with a ruler, carefully drew the line that showed he was now off duty. He felt that deep sense of relief a driver only gets when the wheels stop turning for the day. He was parked, he was safe, and he was surrounded by other drivers. Red set his little wind-up alarm clock on the dash and fell into a deep, solid sleep. He woke up feeling like he'd been hit by a hammer. The inside of the cab was scorching hot, and the bright, unforgiving light of the afternoon sun was blasting through the windshield. But it was the silence that truly shook him. It wasn't just quiet. It was a dead, crushing silence that felt all wrong. The air in the cab was thick and stale, and it carried a foul, sweetish smell, like old weeds rotting in a swamp. Something was very, very wrong. He shoved his logbook aside and climbed out of the cab, his boots hitting the ground with a dry, crunching sound. He looked down and saw that the smooth blacktop he'd parked on was gone. In its place was cracked, crumbling asphalt, with thick, dead weeds growing up through the gaps. He looked around, and a cold wave of dread washed over him. The lot was empty. The other trucks were gone. The brick building was still there, but it was a ruin. A gaping, dark hole was where the door had been, and the windows were covered with weathered gray boards, some of them broken. The sight of it made the metallic taste of fear flood his mouth. His mind was struggling to make sense of it all. He looked at his own truck, and his heart hammered in his chest. The whole rig, from the grill to the back of the trailer, was covered in a thick layer of yellow dust, the kind that takes years to build up. He wiped a spot on his door with his sleeve, and the bright red paint underneath was clean, like it had been protected. It was as if his truck had been sitting in that exact spot for a decade, while the world around it rotted away. He scrambled back into the cab, slamming the heavy door shut. The loud bang echoed across the dead lot, a lonely, metallic sound. His hands were shaking. He looked at the little alarm clock on the dash, and then at his wristwatch. Both of them read 2:15 in the afternoon. He'd only been asleep for a few hours according to his logbook, but the sun and the state of this place told a different story. The time was wrong. Everything was wrong. He felt a deep chill spread through his body, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine groaned, a slow, sick sound, but it wouldn't start. His eyes shot to the fuel gauge. The needle was on empty. It was far lower than it had been when he parked. He felt the hair on his arms stand up as the impossible truth hit him. Something had stolen hours from his life and drank the fuel from his tanks while he slept. His hand brushed against something on the passenger seat. It was a crumpled, soft pack of cigarettes. He picked it up. It was a brand he hadn't seen, let alone smoked, since the early 90s. It was the same brand his father used to smoke. He just stared at it as a new level of terror, cold and sharp, took hold of him. He tried the key again, desperate now. The engine coughed once, twice, and then roared to life. The sound was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. He didn't wait for the air pressure to build. He slammed the gear shifter into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the loose gravel, and he aimed it toward the highway. As the truck tore out of the ruined lot, he risked a glance in his big rearview mirror. For a second, he saw nothing but the decaying building. Then, a figure stepped out from the blackness of the open doorway. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket. Red's heart felt like it was going to explode. As he watched, the man lifted his hand. He didn't wave like someone in trouble. He waved slowly, a gentle back-and-forth motion, like he was saying goodbye to an old friend he knew he'd be seeing again. The man just stood there, getting smaller and smaller in the mirror, a final silent message from a place that shouldn't exist, a place that was waiting just off the road in the shadows.